even if OpenAI behaved perfectly, that's not going to stop anybody else from developing. I think that the distortion OpenAI has had in this conversation is it's made everyone think this is a monopolistic or oligopolistic market. It is not at all. It's the free for all.
I'm Bethany McLean.
Did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea?
And I'm Luigi Zingales.
We have socialism for the very rich, rugged individualism for the poor.
And this is Capital Isn't, a podcast about what is working in capitalism.
First of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed?
And most importantly, what isn't?
We ought to do better by the people that get left behind. I don't think we should kill the capital system in the process.
So Luigi and I recorded a podcast with his colleague, Sendhil Mullainathan, after the Sam Altman brouhaha. Do you guys remember the Sam Altman brouhaha?
The tech world has been thrown into a particular state of chaos and shock following the sudden job change imposed on the former ChatGPT CEO Sam Altman.
Yeah, that's right. The OpenAI board fired Altman.
It seems like a really, really, really long time ago, not just in the world, but in the world of AI. Now we have DeepSeek upending everything.
A new China-based artificial intelligence startup is shaking up an industry known for its rapid innovation. It's called DeepSeek, and its biggest advantage, analysts say, is that it can operate at a lower cost than American AI models like ChatGPT.
Maybe. Plus, tech titans like Mark Andreessen saying the tech establishment got behind Trump because of the Biden administration's regulatory approach to AI.
They said, look, AI is one of these technology. AI is a technology basically that the government is going to completely control. This is not going to be a startup thing. They actually said flat out to us, don't do AI startups. Like, don't fund AI startups. It's not something that we're going to allow to happen. They're not going to be allowed to exist. There's no point. They basically said AI is going to be a game of 2 or 3 big companies working closely with the government, and we're going to basically wrap them in I'm paraphrasing, but we're going to basically wrap them in a government cocoon. We're going to protect them from competition. We're going to control them, and we're going to dictate what they do.
Luigi, has your thinking on AI changed since we last recorded that podcast?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I want to reissue the interview, because I think Sendhil was very insightful. And I have to say, I was wrong. I think he was right and I was wrong. Now I want to extract some of the insights that he had at the time, and what can we do now?
That's funny because I listened to it again too, and I thought, oh, Luigi was wrong. How lovely is this? Luigi actually was wrong. Anyway, what I thought you were wrong about, and I'd love to hear what you thought you were wrong about, but I thought you were wrong when you were arguing against Sendhil's worldview that it was a free-for-all, and you thought the market was already far more captured and at risk of a monopoly or an oligopoly. And I think particularly with DeepSeek upending everything, maybe, as I said, because I don't quite understand that, and it's probably worth discussing. But it does seem that Sendhil was right. Is that the part you were zeroing in on too? Or do you think you were wrong about something else as well?
I might have been wrong about something else as well, but yes, I was zeroing on that part. There was an important technical aspect, trying to understand, is this a scenario where you're going to have a lot of bias to entry? Exposed after the success of DeepSeek, it proved to be absolutely right.
We now toss around this term artificial intelligence, and we all presume that we know what we're talking about. But do we? Would you define AI, artificial intelligence, differently?
I think the way I think about it is it's pretty clear that we now have many algorithms, not just the one like LLMs like ChatGPT, that do things that are what we would think of in some vague use of the word as intelligent. Like in 2000 BC, scribes who did little mathematical calculations were amongst the most valuable forms of intelligence. So in some sense, Excel is the embodiment of a form of intelligence. Think of calculating the accounts of GE. Without Excel, we could not have GE and keep its accounts. You know how many scribes would be needed just to maintain the accounts of GE? Just one company. No one human could do in a lifetime what Excel applied to GE's spreadsheets does in 5 minutes. That simple piece of code is doing things that are unimaginable to humans, which are unlocking things that were unimaginable before, which is now that we can do accounting at scale, we can do corporations of a scale we never imagined, which then the big mistake everybody is making in governance is that they are acting like this is every other form of regulation we've encountered. Like, oh, okay, we're going to regulate, I don't know, it's a good example, a certain kind of derivative. But this is a technology whose shape we don't really understand and whose evolution we're unsure of. So to me, this is an extremely unusual moment. And maybe that you guys might know some historical analog. I'd love to hear it. But where we're not regulating the known, we're regulating both what is unknown today and the evolution of it.
Since you challenge me or us,
Yeah,
let me try.
Yeah, I'd
Since
love
we
it.
both sit on the campus of the University of Chicago, pretty close to the place where the first controlled nuclear reactions took place 81 years ago. First of all, it's interesting the level of risk that Enrico Fermi took to do that on campus, in the place of the second largest US city at the time. Neither the city of Chicago nor the US government, that by the way was financing the initiative, had any idea what he was doing.
Amazing.
And any idea of the risk that he was doing.
Wow.
My view is the only major difference is that this stuff, number one, was mainly financed by the government. So the government had a huge power, was behind, but it was financed. And two, paradoxically, because we were a period of war, there was a sense of moral responsibility to the nation.
Oh, I love this. I just looked this up. It's amazing. It says here that the experiment took place in a squash court beneath the university football stadium. I mean, that is amazing. The first controlled nuclear reaction, some guy above is playing squash. That doesn't really give you a wonderful, calm feeling, does it?
No.
I mean, now we're worried about free speech on campus. Those people are having nuclear explosions. What the hell? This is just like crazy shit.
But actually, how do we know that they're not doing something worse
So yeah,
OpenAI?
I think the nuclear reaction thing is a perfect example. It's an unbelievable powerful technology, and I think it's a good starting point. So let me articulate two things that I think are very different, which actually make it an even harder problem. One is enriching uranium or plutonium to be able to get a sustained reaction is a lot of money. On the other hand, building a large language model is not, and it's getting easier and easier. And while it's in the benefit of companies to tout that they're like light years ahead of everybody else, the open source models are getting really good. Anyone can put them up. And it's not obvious that in 3 years we'll be like, oh, it's true, the first generation looked like that, but we learned a lot. They paid the fixed cost. Now, anybody in a lab with a modest amount of money can start to build things that are their own. And maybe it's not even large language models, whatever next generation comes. So in that sense, if we use the nuclear reaction energy, imagine what nuclear, whatever we call that, the nuclear innovations look like if it only cost $10,000 to acquire uranium and enrich it. That would be a crazy world. That would be a crazy world. But that's not that far from where we are. It's like $100,000, $200,000, $1 million to train, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. 10 million is not a lot of money. 50 million? 50 million is not a lot of money. It's not such a large barrier, and these numbers are going down. So I think that's one big difference, which should actually, like you say, really changes the nature of it. We're not trying to regulate. If we think we're trying to regulate OpenAI, that's a mistake because the problem runs much wider than that. The second thing I think, which is noticeably different, is that as consequential as a nuclear bomb or nuclear power would be, it's contained in where you can expect to see it. A nuclear bomb is an object you can drop on some location and have tragic consequences. These technologies have incredibly wide application. Think of what censorship now can look like. Before, you used to have censors have to read stuff. Now, can you build algorithms that read everything anyone says and automatically censor? What about automatically, if you're a dictatorial regime, automatically find people that you should send your police after? And I don't want to understate the complexity of the problem, because I think what's happening right now on all the alignment stuff, all this stuff, is people are understating how hard the problem is and thereby settling for what appear to be just, I don't know, find band-aids, like we've done something for the sake of saying we've done something. Let me just throw out some proposals, and I'm curious what you all think. So one proposal that I've been fond of is don't regulate the algorithm at all. Or you can if you want, but regulate the user of the algorithm so that the liability sits entirely with them. Like, I don't care how you did it. You use an algorithm, you posted hate, it doesn't matter to me how you did it, you're responsible for it. That would change a lot of things. So for example, a lot of people are adopting medical chatbots or thinking about adopting medical chatbots. Now we know ChatGPT has a lot of hallucinations and things like that. Like, what's the incentives of these people adopting medical chatbots to get rid of these hallucinations? Right now, it's in this weird gray area. Like, is anyone responsible if this thing gives bad medical advice? If we say, yeah, the person responsible for it is the person who's under whose banner this advice is being given, boy, would we see the health system become a lot more skittish about just cavalierly, as they should. They shouldn't hide just because it's an algorithm giving the advice. Like, if one of your nurses did this, you'd have a medical malpractice lawsuit. Nothing has changed. We don't care that it's an algorithm. Like, that's not a bad default, I think, to start off at. If we start from that default, we would then ask the question, why should I give a safe harbor clause to anybody to be able to say, hey, I didn't do it, my algorithm did it? That's a principled question I could then start answering. What are circumstances where I want to give that safe harbor clause? But the default would be no one has it. We'd have to actively give a safe harbor clause. And we would give safe harbor clauses to promote innovation. So, for example, we'd say, look, we've decided there is some value in people who don't have access to medical care being able to get access to algorithms that read their x-rays. So we're going to give a safe harbor clause in those situations to expand care, but under these circumstances, so we can kind of see whether this is actually causing more harm than good. Fine.
I agree with you that there, to some extent, regulation arrives too late. So you need to intervene from a governance point of view. But I think I'm very humble after the experience we just went through from the turmoil at the top of OpenAI. Ironically, OpenAI initially was chartered with the best idea. Our primary fiduciary duty is to humanity. That's what the OpenAI chart says. And they were governed, they're still governed, as far as I know, at the top by a board whose fiduciary responsibility is humanity. But then they seem to behave in a very different way. So how do we get out of it?
But I'll go back to this, the wideness of it. Even if OpenAI behaved perfectly, that's not going to stop anybody else from developing. I think that the distortion OpenAI has had in this conversation is it's made everyone think this is a monopolistic or oligopolistic market. It is not at all. It's the free-for-all. I mean, it's in the interest of the people at the top to convey the idea that, like, they're the ones that control everything. But it's very unlikely that that level of innovativeness is not going to be much more widespread. So I would even double down on your governance thing. Even if we could govern how OpenAI does this, Google does this, and whatever, take the top, Meta and how they all do this. There's going to be places in China that can, there are going to be places in Iran that can download and start running their stuff. They have great technical people. There is a Pandora's box problem here.
I buy completely the fact that OpenAI is not a monopolist. But I don't believe this is a perfectly competitive market. If it was a perfectly competitive market, first of all, OpenAI did not need the $13 billion from Microsoft to develop. It could have remained happily a non-for-profit without raising that amount of money. Again, if this was a perfectly competitive market, when Sam Altman walked out or was forced out, and some of the employees or most of the employees was walking out, OpenAI said, no problem, we hire some other people. So I think we live in a world in which certainly what is not a competitive world, is not a monopoly world, is an oligopoly of a few people, and these people end up having a disproportionate amount of influence on the future of humankind. I think that the option of regulation works very well for this liability issue, but doesn't work very well to direct the future of this. In a sense, this is where I think we need governance, but I don't know exactly what governance we need, because, as you said, it's not just the governance of one individual, it's a broader governance. But paradoxically, I thought about this, and I was talking with my colleague Oliver Hart, and he told me that, if this situation had happened not in California, OpenAI had happened not in California, but in the state of Washington, how different it would have been? Because we know that the state of California does not enforce the non-compete agreements, right? Yeah. And so I don't think that Sam Altman could have walked away and gone and worked for somebody else if he was working actually at Microsoft in the state of Washington. But in California, he could do that, and so could the 600 people who threatened to live with him. So paradoxically, but this freedom creates your problem on steroids.
What's great about your thing is, okay, so let's create a fork. We'll do A and then B. So A is, let's assume this is an oligopoly. And I like the way you put it. If it's an oligopoly, we have at least a good corporate governance framework to think about. Like, do we have some board members who are tasked and appointed for the public interest? Do we have, like, we've had proposals like this. And I love the way you're putting it, because now this feels like a manageable problem. What type of in the weeds regulations could we have involving, can an employee go from here and like actually go to non-compete? What kinds of monopsony are we allowed to have? I think the other fork in the road is, let me try my best just to say, guys should walk away from this at least keeping the possible hypothesis that we don't have an oligopoly. So here's one way to think about it. The best argument for the oligopoly, I think, is that all the training data that OpenAI has, other people won't have. That's the best argument in my mind. But outside of that, the billions that are being spent on compute, the irony of it is that our ability to do what OpenAI was doing just a year ago, the compute cost of that has gone way down, because that's the innovation that's happening. The innovation that's happening is we're learning how to do this stuff at lower and lower cost. So it's why the open source models are actually extremely good. I'd actually encourage you to just try them. They're like getting, but are they at ChatGPT? No, but for a funny reason, it's not obvious to me that they're not much closer than they seem. OpenAI has also done a bunch of stuff where instead of just using their language model, to do a lot of stuff inside to make it kind of like look good to the average user. And the open source community is just building the language model, the workhorse, and not doing this other stuff. I don't know what the real gap looks like if you get rid of the fringe stuff. I guess the other thing is I'm a little cynical. It is in the interest of these few companies to portray the image that they are the only ones that matter. It's in their strong financial interest, like extremely strong. And so I am skeptical of that.
So speaking of money and financial incentives, I have a really basic question, which is, I think it's always really tempting to think for-profit bad, not-for-profit good. If we just make these companies not-for-profit or get not-for-profit representatives on the boards, we fix things and they're a countervailing force. But is it really so clear when it comes to AI, given the myriad of motivations that people can have? Is it so clear that the profit motive is always bad? And is it so clear that a not-for-profit agenda fixes anything?
I think when we align it as profit, not for profit, we hide the true differences of opinion that exist independent of the profit motive as to what socially good means. Like on the alignment literature, a lot of the alignment that people are doing, it's not obvious there's broad agreement for. So we're actually giving power in the nonprofit structure to the people who are deciding, for example, here's one I agree with. It feels like having these things use racist epithets is not a good thing. But there are many people out there who would say, like in a joke, why is that not a problem? But as you go down the type of things we align on, it gets more and more divergent. So like an example could be, if you look at the latest versions of ChatGPT, like it'll just refuse to do certain things in the interest of alignment that you're like, really? Like we're not supposed to do that? That's just weird. And so I think this just speaks to your point that calling it profit versus not for profit hides the fact that we don't have collective consensus on what alignment would look like. And that is a deep problem. At least we have collective consensus on what profit looks like. I mean, for good or worse. Yeah.
But I think you exaggerate a bit in the sense, if you go into social issue, I think, of course, we quickly disagree. But when you think about hurting humankind in a major way, I hope that the disagreement is much less. And I think we should learn from the mistakes we made in the past. And it's if you look at, for example, Facebook experimented with a lot of stuff, experimented with much of the behavioral economic stuff to maximize the engagement. They basically, at least from what I read, pay zero attention to the consequence, the harm that it would create, for example, to young women or to minorities that are persecuted in various countries, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think that protecting the mental health of young girls or protecting the minorities in Myanmar is something we vastly disagree. And if you're only focused on profit, you don't give a damn, because at the end of the day, they made a lot of money and they don't care. So we should not go into the detail of being super politically correct, because that's where we get bogged down. But on some fundamental principle, we should intervene.
I think it gets more complicated far more quickly than you're making out, Luigi. So mental health of adolescents. Should Facebook prevent the posting of photos where people are in like bikinis and look very thin? What if I showed you there's lots of good evidence that that starts to create eating disorders? This is why content moderation has proven impossible. Like, there is no platform that's doing content moderation that many people are happy with. Everybody's bothered.
But sorry, let me interrupt you there, because you're absolutely right that the implementation is very complicated. But I don't want this to be excused that we do nothing. And in particular, in the case of Facebook, it's not that they made a mistake on the right trade-off. They didn't even consider certain things. In a sense, and they, from the whistleblower evidence, they were brought to their evidence that this was problematic, and they pay zero attention. So now you're saying we are not on the first order condition of the right, but if you put zero weight, it's zero weight.
No. I'm definitely not saying we shouldn't do anything. I think I'm asking the question, what should the nature of what we do be that reflects, for example, the heterogeneity of opinions that are there? So here's an example. Like, I think if we just took the idea, I'm not even saying this is a good idea, but if we just took the idea that we're going to have board members that represent public interest, the fact that public interest is varied actually raises a deep and interesting question of how should those people be chosen? It's not unreasonable to say we're going to have some form of public participation in the choosing those board members. And maybe the right thing is to actually have an equilibrium where some companies have some opinions reflected and other companies have different opinions reflected. Like, this is not an argument for doing nothing. It's more just an argument for saying, given that we live in a pluralistic society, what does it mean to regulate in the collective interest? I don't think we want to end up in a situation where we do nothing, which I agree with. I also don't think we want to end up in a situation where we only do that thing we all can agree on, because that seems too little. Like, all of us will be unhappy. We clearly need some innovation in governance. How are we going to get experimentation in governance going? Because that's what we kind of need at this point. We need some experiments in governance.
We had on our podcast earlier this year Ellen Landemore, who is a political scientist at Yale, and she's a big supporter of the idea of citizen assemblies. Basically, randomly drawn group of the population that deliberate on these issues. What do you think about this idea?
I love this. These technologies also enable certain kinds of governance we never had before. Like, why do we need to have a board member that we pick from the elite who goes and sits? Like, we have a lot of things. Citizen governance is awesome. We could have people making votes, a certain subsets of people, on specific design choices, on specific alignment questions. There's just so much that you could imagine doing. And I think that it's going to require some amount of just trying and seeing what happens. And if there was a way we could encourage, either in the AI space or not even in the AI space, like, let's just pick a traditional sector. Like, what would it mean to have citizen governance in, I don't know, utilities? Like, that's been a persistent question. Utilities are supposed to be in the public interest. We have some regulator. What would it look like to have some governance innovation in the utility sector? Like, my view is these technologies are going to make us all better off, for sure. The question is, how do we make sure that happens? Because there is risk associated with them. And for me, governance, regulation, it's all just a way to get us to what I think is a really good state that we couldn't imagine before.
Thank you very much. This was lovely.
This was so
much
fun. Thank you.
Yeah, this was so much fun. Thank you for the
time. Yeah, I really enjoyed this.
I did too. If you're enjoying the discussions we're having on this program, there's another University of Chicago Podcast Network show you should check out. It's called The Pie. Economists are always talking about the pie, how it grows and shrinks, how it's sliced, and who gets the biggest share. Join veteran NPR host Tess Vigland as she talks with leading economists about their cutting-edge research and the key events of the day. Hear how the economic pie is at the heart of issues like the aftermath of a global pandemic, jobs, energy policy, and so much more.
So, The question of regulation that we asked Sendhil, to some extent, is even more interesting now after realizing that it's very difficult to have regulation because competition will be so intense and entry will be so diffuse. And when I think about regulation, I can think about three potential different objectives. One is the issue of how to manage liability as a result of AI. And I think that what Sendhil said in his interview is perfect. I think we should shift the liability to the people using AI, not to the people generating. Maybe we should have some exemption, but when I was thinking about the exemption, I was thinking about, the safe harbor clause that we introduced at the beginning of the internet phase in 96 is still hunting us. So it's very dangerous to have those exemptions.
Can I interrupt you really quickly? When you talk about the exemption that was granted, you mean Section 230, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was done with at least apparently with the best intention.
Yeah.
We should learn from the past mistakes, and I think we should try to avoid them.
Agreed. Okay, your second objective.
The second objective is the issue of the timing of a displacement. Every technology tends to have substitute labor in some dimension and create some disruption. One interesting factor that I learned is that people now characterize AI as a double exponential. So an exponential of an exponential to say is much, much faster than anything we've seen before. And so the question is it okay to let it rip? I understand that you are always afraid that if you start putting limits, it might delay some beneficial innovation. But this idea of just purely letting rip, I think is pretty dangerous in my view. And I feel that the conversion of Silicon Valley to Trump is precisely for that reason. So I think that the speed of innovation is really breathtaking, which is great on some point of view, but there will be a lot of loser along the way. What you do, I think, is a really, really important question. The third one, which is even deeper and probably the most problematic one, is this issue of alignment. So the risk that, like 2001 Space Odyssey, HAL takes over the mission is pretty serious. And honestly, I'm at a loss, even after re-listening to the conversation with Sendhil, I'm a little bit at a loss on how to do it.
So let's talk about those in order, starting with your second point about the timing of a displacement. We're in effect watching now the political upheaval that resulted in part from not managing globalization, right? Maybe slow it down in order to give people a chance to adapt. Maybe you can't stop it, but you can slow it. And you can make the adjustment to the displacement easier, given the risks not only to people and their jobs, but as we see now, to entire communities and children, that it's not something people tend to recover from. So I think it's a really important point. I guess Sendhil was very optimistic. You too are very optimistic. But I've read some interesting things recently about how the numbers aren't showing up yet. And despite all the hundreds of billions that are being spent, the numbers aren't showing up in any statistics yet, or at least in any productivity statistics. And I know you can argue that with innovations from electricity to computers. It took a while for the numbers to show up in any official statistics. And so maybe it's just filtering through the economy very slowly. But maybe its uses are a lot more limited than people think, that the idea that so many tasks are going to be replaced by AI just isn't true. And I'm not sure anybody has the answer to that yet, but I don't know that it's answered yet.
Since I've been wrong in the past, I'm a little bit hesitant to take bold predictions here. But my limited understanding is that the innovation is for real. And as you said, there's a very, very famous sentence by Robert Solow in the late 80s that you see the effect of computers everywhere except in productivity, with the timing that is characteristic of economists. When they point out to a regularity, the regularity changes. And so the moment he said it, basically the 90s brought a boost in productivity that was by and large the result of computer innovation. It takes time for organization to adapt and change. And so I'm very optimistic long term, but in the same way in which I retrospectively think the Industrial Revolution was a great thing. Now, if you ask the loomers in England in 1810, wasn't that great for them? How do you manage this trade-off? One way to manage is to move ahead as fast as possible and use guns to prevent any problem. That's exactly what England did with the Luddite. They were killed. Now, yes, that's sped up the introduction of mechanization in the textile industry by a few years. Was it really worth it? For instance, if you said, do you want to block industrialization? I say no, but if you slow it down, maybe it was not such a terrible thing. And by the way, if you look at other countries, so France was not that much behind England, but I think that managed the process a little bit better. We don't have massacres of Luddites along the way in France. So it's not like it's inevitable that every technological revolution you have to massacre the losers.
Well, I certainly hope that's not the case, at least in the modern world, although you can argue that some of what we did to communities in globalization amounted to a massacre. But I do think that, broadly read, this is part of the problem with figuring out what to do with a displacement, is that we don't even know what the timing of a displacement is going to be or what it's going to look like. In other words, if you look at these remarkable innovations that ended up changing the world from electricity to computerization, it wasn't clear immediately what they were going to do and who they were going to hurt and who they were going to benefit. And so I think part of the problem with managing this transition is that we just don't know yet. But moving on to your third point about safety, I've also thought that's really challenging because, as you can see in the fights, maybe too strong a word, but the disagreements between Anthropic and OpenAI, and the resignations of people from OpenAI, even people in the field don't agree on what makes this technology safe and what makes it unsafe. And so how do you decide what safety is when even those who are most enmeshed in the details don't know what safety is?
But also, if you are becoming an expert in a field, you're bound to be optimistic about this field. You don't want to invest massively in understanding that field and just to stop what is going on. So even without bringing any financial incentives, but just out of pure selection, all the specialists on AI will be overly optimistic about the impact of AI by design. And so it's very difficult to think about how to follow what's going on in an objective way, let alone regulate it. And it says you would like to have some government experts overseeing that. But to what extent? I'm sure you've seen the movie Oppenheimer. I don't remember who was the head of the military that was in charge of the entire operation. He had limited understanding of what the atomic bomb was and the consequences, etc. So much so that they were all watching at a distance, but not that distant. Most of the people in that experiment, they die of cancer shortly after. So I don't know today if we have the expertise in the government to oversee this without being completely captured by the techno-optimism.
Yeah, it does come back to Trump and the oligarchy. I worry a lot that we're no longer capable of coming to any kind of smart regulatory strategy because so much of our apparatus has been captured by lobbyists who speak in the name of industry. And I worry that if that was true under the Biden administration, that it's going to be true times 100 under the Trump administration. Certainly, obviously, people in technology like Mark Andreessen are betting on that. And I worried when I read his interview because he was so harsh about the Biden administration and basically said that they wanted to kill AI, that we were up against what looked like the absolutely terrifying prospect of a second term, that they were just going to make government control it all. We were going to make sure that AI will be a function of these 2 or 3 large companies. Was it really that bad? Is that actually what the Biden administration people said? Or is that Andreessen's take on it or spin on it now in order to scare us all about regulation?
That's a very good question. I think that both parties are sufficiently heterogeneous that you can easily pick and choose your voice if you want to make a case. Immediately after the interview with Mark Andreessen, Ross Douthat interviewed Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon thinks the worst of Mark Andreessen, thinks that Silicon Valley is all evil. He sounded like a Democrat in the view of Mark Andreessen. So there are voices on both sides. What I'm getting more and more convinced is that the techno brothers or bro tech, whatever it is, the oligarchs are going to push for some form of safe harbor clause for AI. Because if you really apply rigidly what Sendhil suggested, which is a very strict liability to every user of AI, people would be very reluctant because they don't understand. And between the devil you know and the devil you don't know, do you really want to try the devil you don't know? And it's just probably at this point, the self-driving cars are more reliable than most drivers. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I'm just positing this. But if you are the head of a trucking company, etc., do you really want to decide tomorrow to substitute all your drivers with a self-driving car? Probably not, especially if you pay a liability. Now, if they exempt you from liability, then you go like full force.
I think part of the challenge in this will be determining the difference between what a very powerful tech titan may say the technology does and what it actually does. And to take your self-driving car analogy, if you had listened to what Elon Musk said about his self-driving cars, you might be dead. Whereas if you had gone with others in the industry like Waymo, maybe the self-driving cars are safer than actual drivers. So it makes me all the more concerned about the broligarchy. I can't say it either, because it's just, there is this gap between what people say is true and what is actually true. I like, in theory, your idea of liability, but how would you measure the liability? In other words, if the damage that AI is going to do is allowing a foreign government to infiltrate the US because AI has been unleashed, how do you go after that foreign government or these foreign stateless actors? Or if the damage that AI does is it wipes out huge swaths of jobs throughout communities, who pays for the damages? And so, to me, the most likely and most scary suite of damages from AI aren't ones where there's a target for the liability.
Actually, I disagree. This is, let's say Facebook applies AI and that allows a foreign government to interfere. You go after Facebook. You don't go after AI. In the same way in which if I'm a doctor and I decide that all of a sudden my x-rays are read by a machine rather than a person, and I miss some significant cases, I'm liable. What I would do, I organize a agency that is good at testing this, so to make it easier to prove a case, because I think the complexity of this stuff is that the only one who controls this technology are the oligarchs. So you have to trust their words. On the other hand, if you have objective testing, this is one of the great innovations that in part was the result of our friend Ralph Nader, is that there are crash tests for cars. And the crash test for cars is not just the car company doing the crash test, is an agency doing the crash test and exposing that sometimes, for example, bigger cars are not necessarily safer. I think enormous improvements have been made on safety of cars as a result of those crash tests. So what I would do if I were in charge, I would try to build more agency able to do that test.
I hear you on the Facebook part of it, but I think that's just going to be a sliver of the potential damages done by AI. And as much as I like your idea about building agencies that can do for everything AI might do the way Ralph Nader did for automobiles with crash tests, I think Sendhil's point is that AI isn't going to work that way because the number of applications are just so immense. What do? You'd have to build 10,000 different bureaus in order to have the expertise to figure out whether somebody got damaged or whether they didn't. I mean, it would be full employment for lawyers for sure, but I'm just not sure that your idea is feasible. And if AI is as manifold, manifest, all-encompassing as we're being told it is.
I'm not so sure that it is full employment for lawyers. Full employment for computer people and testing people. But we have a lot of this agency already. It's just bringing up the capabilities.
In a world where Elon Musk is gutting all of our agencies, does this become another?
No, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. But now you see why he's gutting all the agencies, because he wants AI to rip without any consequence. And I'm with you that this system is not going to eliminate the elimination of jobs, but it might slow it down a bit. And that's the best we can hope. But you put the finger exactly in the right place. We have some capabilities. We need to increase those capabilities because whenever you present any new device in medicines, there is a procedure to be approved. Whenever you introduce a new car, whenever you introduce a new product, there are a bunch of product safety bureaus. The point is that they are not equipped. And so we need to speed up their technology and their competency very, very fast.
even if you set up these bureaus, these thousands of bureaus that could evaluate these claims, then they would be duked out by lawyers on each side. In order to make that whole thing work smoothly, you might need a full-scale revision of our court system as well, because otherwise the court system would get run over by these cases. But then, just to go back to something Sendhil said, what does it mean to regulate in the collective interest? We don't want to do nothing, but we also don't want to do the only thing we can all agree on. We need pluralism in this, and we clearly need innovation in government, some experimentation in governance. And I think that's exactly right. But can anything in the U.S. adapt in real time or at speed? And can anything in the U.S. adapt at real time and at speed when all the forces are pushing against it existing at all? And I am worried about the answer to those questions.
So the French came up with their large language model, Mistral, which seems to be very good. I think what is interesting is that even the European caught up. I think that that's an indication that the cost of copying goes down over time, because my understanding is that the way Mistral succeeded, in spite of the rigid regulation in Europe about not using data for privacy reasons, is that they use OpenAI to train their large language model. And so that automatically cut down dramatically the cost of training new models and really makes AI a much more competitive sector.
I don't know that that's true, because what I don't understand is then, are the advances of this new French model and DeepSeek then conditional on OpenAI's advances? In other words, is it truly a competitive market, or is it simply fast following, and any real innovation will have to be done by OpenAI because other people are just building off what they've done? Can they build off it and leapfrog it, or can they only build off it and be as good but not better?
But even if you take the second interpretation, this will have a lot of implication, for example, for regulation. You are making much easier for other people to enter. So you regulate the American AI, and all of a sudden Europe does something, or next you know, not only China, but maybe some people in India would do something. So I think that makes the point that Sendhil made a long time ago very salient.
Yeah, it's not only huge for regulation, but it's also huge for consumer choice, or for business choice, because if another model is much cheaper than OpenAI and doesn't quite have the functionality, isn't quite as up to date as OpenAI's, but is just one step behind, then that changes the entire pricing dynamic of the whole industry, right?
Absolutely. Not only the pricing dynamic, but as you said, the consumer choice. Think about Google. It's not like Bing was able to copy Google in the search engine and have something close.
The only thing that I think is a contrary point to this is that when all the big firms announced their CapEx budgets for AI, it was double what the market was expecting. So instead of spending less on CapEx because they're cheaper models now, they're spending more. And so I don't think I understand why that is. If in other words, now you don't have to spend as much because DeepSeek showed you can do this so much less expensively, you would have expected the big tech firms' AI budgets to decline.
No, but don't you think that because of competition, they invest more? This is a tension that it goes back to Schumpeter, but is competition only driven by the expectation of future rents, or is it driven by the fear of losing the existing rents and to be ahead of your competitor? And so as the competitors are coming closer and closer, everybody's trying to outdo the other. And as a result, you have more investments.
I'm not sure it applies, and here's why. And again, it's something I don't understand, because what I don't know is if the investment is in building their own AI capabilities or in using existing AI technology to animate productivity. And so if it's the former, then yes, it would apply. But if it's in investing in order to be able to use AI capabilities, then you would think a cheaper large language model would mean that the amount of investment required would go down. Is it competing to develop large language models, or is it competing to deploy those models throughout somebody's business? And those are two different things to me. And so that
No, of course, they are two very different things. I think, but I'm not an expert, but I think that when you look at the big companies from OpenAI to Microsoft to Mistral to Anthropic, they are, and DeepSeek, they are competing to build better and better large language models. So they are competing in that space, and they see an advantage of being ahead. And as the other are approaching, they spend even more to be ahead.
Yeah, but I think the CapEx number encompasses, or is mostly the companies that are employing AI. And so again, if the cost had just gone down dramatically, you would expect their spend to have gone down dramatically. There are these data points that just don't quite line up enough for me to be clear about anything. So should we talk about Elon Musk? He got more interesting too.
Absolutely. So what do you think about his bid?
All right, right now, a rivalry between big tech billionaires playing out as we speak. We're talking about Elon Musk and OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. Altman firing back after a Musk-led group submitted an unsolicited $97.4 billion bid to take over OpenAI.
I don't know. I guess my first reaction is a slightly strange one, in that I'm relieved that the tech moguls hate each other, and that Sam Altman was so dismissive of Musk's bid and clearly so angry about it. I like that a lot more than a world where they're all buddy-buddy, but you can't really have a oligarchy if they're all at each other's throats, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's a pretty sad state of affair where we have to hope for the oligarchs to fight each other to have a little bit of freedom. I was expecting a little bit more from the United States when I moved here.
That's a fair point. Maybe my expectations have been so diminished by the last bunch of years that I'm just relieved to see squabbling.
But I think there is a very clever point that I so emphasize, but not enough. Remember, OpenAI is in the middle of a transformation between a non-for-profit to a for-profit. Of course, I'm not a legal expert on the topic, and when I ask actually my legal colleagues, very few are expert on this particular topic. But this particular topic is what you need to do to move from a non-for-profit to a profit entity. And one of the rules is that you have to show that you are not expropriating the non-for-profits and the ultimate goal that you are trying to finance with a non-for-profit in this transformation. Okay, so in the moment in which Musk is making a $94 billion, what is the number?
Who knows? $1 billion here,
yeah.
$1 billion there.
Who knows? Offer to OpenAI is basically putting a floor on the value of the non-for-profit. And so now in the transformation, they need to show that they are leaving to the charity $94 billion. So he has made the transformation much more expensive for Sam Altman.
See, I'm delighted by that. Maybe that's not billionaires squabbling, but I'm delighted by that. I'm delighted by anybody throwing a wrench in anything. Is that terrible? That must betray something really awful.
No, it's not terrible, because in this case, you are delighted at the fact that $94 billion would be available for public charity.
Yeah, but I wonder if he's doing it just to be a jerk, right? Just to throw sand in the gears of a competitor, or if he's doing it absolutely because he's serious. But it may not even matter, because Musk seems to have an incredible amount of luck in that, you remember with Twitter, he set out to buy it. It was kind of a joke. He didn't actually want to buy it. He got forced to buy it because he actually bought control of all 3 branches of the U.S. government. So it turned out to be incredibly lucky for him that his feet were held to the fire and he was forced to buy it. So it's kind of this annoying, even if he's setting out to throw sand in the gears of Sam Altman, and it may end up working out to his advantage somehow because he seems to be lucky that way.
I disagree. I think he did it on purpose. He knew that the power that was coming with Twitter, and he paid for that power. When he claimed that he wanted to get out, it was just a way to get a lower price, a negotiation tactic. But I think he was there all along. Anyway, at least one time is there something for the benefit of humankind.
Maybe so.
Capitalism is a podcast from the University of Chicago Podcast Network and the Stiegler Center in collaboration with the Chicago Booth Review. The show is produced by me, Matt Hodep, and Leah Cesarine, with production assistance from Utsav Gandhi, Sodom Kim, Sebastian Burka, Andy Shee, and Brooke Fox. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to take our conversation further, also check out promarket.org, a publication of the Stiegler Center, and subscribe to our newsletter. Sign up at chicagobooth.edu/Stiegler to discover exciting new content, events, and insights. We hope you'll join our community today, again at chicagobooth.edu/Stiegler.